the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. On this fourth Sunday of Pascha, we brought forth some very important feast days, which unfortunately now times sort of bypassed very simply with not much consideration given to them. As you know, during the Great Lenten period, we learnt how certain individuals gave us all that we needed in spiritual life to understand how to live that life in order to fix our souls up. Now during the Paschal period, when we have grace, because grace is now being given through the resurrection, we are sort of pushed to another level. It is now assumed that we know how to conduct our lives, but there is now the requirement to bring forth fruit, given that we have been taught these things. I'm always amazed in these modern times how there is a lot of bragging from secular society, various institutions, universities and whatever, about how they think they've invented all these new things, particularly over the past 100 years or so. As if it was never known before and never done before. And for example, we have this situation that some of you may have experienced in your life where you can go and learn management theory, business management and all those sorts of things. And you're taught how to set objectives, set schedules, put down all little deeds and little activities that need to be done and how to manage them and control them and whatever. As if it's something new has come to be. Well, guess what? The way that Christ did his work on earth certainly embraces all that and more. He set us aright with the knowledge of the theories, the theology of salvation, as we learnt in the Great Lenten period. And now, given that, he sends us off to bring forth fruit out of that. This particular part of the Paschal period is called Mid-Pentecost, which occurs on Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, which is halfway between the resurrection and the Pentecost period, which is when the church, the heavenly church, is brought down to earth and established as the new covenant for everybody to join and seek salvation. Imagine if Christ just came, did his work and left. And then on Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit came down and so-called enlightened others, they were told to go to all the nations. But having no real knowledge of what to do, what would they do? How would they teach people? How would they know? You go to another nation which has totally different customs, different languages, and you're supposed to relate to these people and basically give them a missionary conversation so that they understand the whole providence of salvation and join the church. How would you know all this? Well, I've told you before that during this 40-day period, when Christ is still on earth with his apostles, he is taking them through this boot camp situation. He's teaching them all the details that they need in order to be able to do that. Management theory. How are you going to manage the church when it's brought? How are you going to set it up? What vestments are you going to use? What services are you going to use? How are you going to talk to people from different nations especially? All these sorts of things he showed us and did for us during this period. And we learn today from these readings how the Jews who understood very well what he was saying were vehemently trying to destroy him because he was putting them to shame that they had all the law and they were supposed to know all these things, and yet they did not do that which was given to them. You know, they say that because this person today was healed of his infirmity for 38 years because he couldn't get into the miraculous pool in Jerusalem, that was the reason that they attacked Christ. No, that was just the excuse. The reason was, as we just read now, was because he was actually putting them all to shame on account of their sinful way of life. And can you imagine that? Such vehemence that they wanted to kill him. You know, really. Did he do them that harm or anything like that? All he did was point out to them that they weren't doing that which they should have been doing. And of course they did manage to arrange for him to be crucified. That we read this because these things occurred during that period of the Jewish feast between the Sabbath and Pentecost, which was Jewish feasts from ancient time. The Passover being the time when the Hebrews left Egypt, and the Pentecost being when they entered the promised land. So that 50 days, although it wasn't 50 days, it was 40 years or more, but on the 50th day, that's what they celebrated. And to us, in the New Covenant, we of course celebrate the Sabbath as Pascha, as the day of resurrection, no longer the day of sorrow and bitterness of fleeing from Egypt and going into the desert. And we don't celebrate the Pentecost as if it's entering the promised land, but rather entering the church. And we have to know how to conduct ourselves in that respect. It's no longer an excuse to say, I don't know how to. I don't know how to live spiritual life. I don't know the theology that I need to talk to others. It's no excuse, because we are given that every time we go to church, every day actually. We are given those that knowledge that we need. In the Gospels, it's often associated with water, because water is life, as you know, and without water there can be no earthly life as we know it now. And Christ says that out of him will flow fountains of water. What does that mean? You know, Christ's fountains of water, does it mean literally water's going to flow out of him? No, he's talking about the knowledge, the understanding of the way of salvation. If you like the philosophy, although philosophy is certainly a few notches down from theology, but the understanding of everything that he did. Because having been with his disciples for 3 years or so, they still didn't quite understand everything. It was very strange that even after the resurrection, it says that they saw all this, yet some doubted. So how much do you have to pound a person's mind with and heart with before they grab the understanding of what has happened? That's why during the Pentecost day, when the Holy Spirit comes down, it enlightens and fills in all those misunderstandings which a lot of people had. Not only that, but gave them the power to speak in other languages, so that they could indeed go to all these different nations and show them the path to salvation, talk to them in ways that they would understand. It'd be pretty discouraging to go to some place and start teaching them these things that Christ did, when they say, well, who is this Christ? What are you talking about? What is this? In the Acts of the Apostles, we'll read later on how when Paul went to Athens and spoke to them about the resurrection of the dead and these sorts of things, they said, well, our ears having trouble understanding what you're saying and listening to you, maybe you should come back another time and tell us, because we don't get it, you know. It takes effort, it takes more than just one listening in many times to understand what salvation's all about. That's why the church continually brings these things forward to us. And from now on, during this period of post-resurrection and Pentecost, the focus is on that the church assumes we know now, and that we bring forth fruit. Because if Christ has given us all these things, he's going to expect that we use our talents in some way to gain something that we can show for our life here. It doesn't mean that by doing this we are saved. It doesn't mean that at all. Salvation has already been given, right? Christ came, he redeemed us through the new covenant. He redeemed those captured in Hades. But it is pleasing to him that we bring forth fruit out of all of that, and therefore get honours in the heavenly realm. That's what we're striving for right now. And people attain those honours in different ways. Some through this mission, some through, even through martyrdom, confess Christ under difficult situations and attain salvation, which is strengthening others who see that a person is willing to suffer and suffer greatly in order to stay with Christ and never give him up. If only now, today, we saw and see church leaders doing that, because it's very hard to see that, particularly to those who are out there in the limelight. I hate to say this, but there are so many compromises now going on amongst the officialdom in the church that it's quite disheartening. Just when you want them and they are given the opportunity to confess the truth, they don't. They compromise. They've asked for favours from the world. They've asked for money. They've asked for property. They've asked for signs, Greek church, this direction or something, and they've been given it. And now it's payback time. You've compromised with the world, pay back. You shouldn't have compromised in the first place, but stuck to the truth. Then you wouldn't have had all this problem, and the people would have followed you much more strongly and in much more faith than they do now. These are the sort of things that we are facing right now in real time. And last year when we experienced these lockdowns, it really showed how far this compromise has gone in the world and how unhealthy it is. There is so much debate about it. There's so many people that have been like having the carpet pulled from under them, just as when they've come into Orthodoxy, all of a sudden they see hierarchs compromising, rejecting the true faith. So what are they going to do? They say, I've given up everything to become Orthodox, and I see bishops and whatever doing these sorts of things. Well, what kind of faith is that? Now, they would rather compromise with the worldly leaders, the politicians, and all those fashionable figures that pop up all the time around us, which we are supposed to be rejecting. May we be strengthened in this, because having seen this example of healing the paralytic, next week we see the conversation with the Samaritan woman, again, a missionary conversation, and then with the blind man restoring his sight, who was blind from birth. All to consolidate the fact that Christ is Christ and can perform these sorts of miracles, and that he has come to give us the true understanding of things through these sort of various conversations. I know that because of this sort of digital world that we live in today, there are very few people read now, which is a bad thing, because you do have to read and study to understand these things. Merely watching a clip or something on YouTube is not enough. You do have to study spiritual life, and you have to apply it to your own self. Because if you don't, it just becomes a story which goes in sort of one ear and out the other, and it doesn't hang on to you in your heart. May we not fall into that temptation, because it is a temptation, to make it easy for us to sort of unknowingly reject that which has been given to us. We want to be true to Christ, and yet we do very little to be true to him in this day and age. And a lot of that stems from the fact that our leaders don't show the example when they should show that example. Instead, they live a worldly life with, big apartments and cars and even aeroplanes that they own, which is what Christ took a whip to. If you remember when he met the money changers at the temple, he got the whip and drove them out, because that is not what it's all about. There is no such thing as obtaining worldly wealth through the church. The wealth you obtain, a heavenly wealth, which is going to be manifest after the great judgment and the resurrection of the dead. God help us in these struggles, and God help us especially to acquire this knowledge, because there is so much confusion out there right now. So much. Whoever you touch, even those in the church, and even clergy, I hate to say it, they've lost the idea of what is salvation. They really have. And they can't give a good word to those who come and seek that. Well, if they can't, then what's the point? What is it that they want in their life? They're missing that point, and they're missing the chance not only to help others, but to gain some sort of fruit in their